Welcome again, everybody, to this third and final debate between universities. Today's motion will be, this House will arm the Syrian opposition. From the proposition side, we have the IHEC Carthage team. The team members are Suhir Shari, Shamsuddin Abdul and Hesham Brigade. On my left is the opposition side. The opposition is the team Franklin Center, comprised of Ms. Busha Qureshi, Ms. Syrian Ibrahim, and Ms. Safa Shabab. Judging this debate will be the honorable judges, Mr. Thomas Hoskin, Mr. Safar Rizki, Ms. Sarwa Bardesi, Mr. Harish Natarjan, and Mr. Manos Mosho Uros. Before we start, I'd like to remind you of the rules of this debate. We will be using, like the last debate, the same format, the extended Mace format. We start by the proposition side. First speaker will have 6 minutes. Then the opposition's first speaker will have 6 minutes. Then the proposition side will have the opportunity to rebuttal through its second speaker for 6 minutes. And then it's time for the rebuttal of the opposition side for another 6 minutes. During these 4 first interventions, points of information are accepted after the first minute and before the last minute. Time for the points of information will be could be easily observed by the green screen. After that, we open the floor to the audience to address questions to either the proposition or the opposition team for 10 minutes. And then we conclude with the final remarks of the opposition team first. Third speaker will have 3 minutes to answer the questions of the audience and give the final statement. And after that, we finish with the proposition team to its first speaker. To begin with, I'd like to welcome Ms. Suhir Shari from the proposition team. Ms. Suhir, you have the floor.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, honorable judges, and the opposite team. So, first of all, I would like to begin my speech with a quote of the Tunisian poet Abu al-Qasim al-Shabi. No fear unless there is equality between powers. This House would arm the Syrian opposition. Who is the Syrian opposition for this House? Why are we going to arm them, and what are the outcomes of this arming? First of all, I'm going to give you the definition of the opposition for this House. This House believes that the opposition of Syria is the Syrian Free Army, which is the main armed opposition structure operating in Syria, and which is composed of Syrian armed forces, personnel, and volunteers. You will ask me why. I'm going to tell you that they are forces in Syria, and they are the most structured opposition in Syria, and they are the only ones that we can trust, that we can be responsible for giving them the responsibility and the confidence. And right now, I'm talking about the international community. International community should give them the confidence because they are capable, they are structured, and we can rely on them on making Syria a modern Syria. Thank you, I'll take it later. So, let me start with some questions. First of all, do terroristic groups exist in Syria? Yes, and no one can deny this. There is local ones and foreign ones. I'll take it later. Second question, if we don't arm the opposition, do that mean that they want to be armed in an illegal way? No. I'm going to give you another question. If we don't support the revolutionaries in Syria, will this put an end to the crisis? And right now I'm talking about a political one. a cultural one, a social one, a humanitarian one. I'm talking about a real crisis in Syria. It's not like I'm talking about a new crisis. It's from a long time. These questions, the answer of this question is no. If we don't support the arm, if we are not going to support the opposition in Syria, do they not going to be armed in another way? No. So we still have terrorism. We still have, I'll take it later, thank you. We still have terrorism. We still have murders. We still listen to bombs in Syria. We still listen to a lot of manifestations. We are really in front of an emergency and an urgent situation in Syria. Wouldn't be then a good solution for the international community right now to arm the opposition, and this in order to make a recovery in the Syrian situation. I'll take it later. Thank you. So, why will we arm? The second question, why are we going to give them arms? The answer is very easy. Because there is a crisis. There is an urgent crisis. 60 million people are killed. This is the UN report. In 2 years of the revolution, 60,000 persons are killed. Isn't it urgent to see people, our brothers, sisters, killed and to just do not anything? There is no balance between the powers, and that's what I started with. A quote which mentioned that there is no balance. As we are here talking about an institutional arming, we are going to arm them institutionally. We are going to put an end to the illegal arming. We are going to control. We are talking about institutions that are going to arm in a legal way, not in an illegal way. They are arming anyway. So just, I'll take it later. Thank you. Okay, so we are talking about the right of Syrian people to decide for themselves. They are able to decide. They're able to decide, and we are also, the international community, we are also responsible for giving them the chance to have a good life, a better way of life. And this with arming the opposition, because we are not, if you are not going to arm them, terrorist groups are going to be more and more and more. And in an illegal way, we cannot control them. And I'm talking about not arming them just for a whole period or a long period, just to make them remove the Bashar Assad regime, just to make the people feel for the first time of their lives capable to choose for their future and also for their policies. We are here, we have confidence. We know that we can build confidence on the Syrian Free Army. We believe that they are capable to put peace in Syria. Let's be together. This is the international community. We are responsible. We are talking about Syria. It's a geopolitical situation. It's very important. It's very important because right now we are talking about our brothers.
Thank you very much. From the Rugby Center, Miss Bushra Quraish.
Good morning.
Good morning, dear judges, dear proposition team, dear moderators, dear audience, ladies and gentlemen. My mates, Syrian Safa, and I are here this morning to oppose the motion. Hence, our house would not arm the Syrian opposition, that is, the Free Syrian Army. Indeed, with the death toll climbing above 70,000 in February 2013, and here I'm correcting your figures, according to the UN High Commission for Human Rights, as well as images of bloodbath flooding the media, there has been a cascade of politicians jumping on the bandwagon of arming the Free Syrian Army. Hence, sending weapons to rebels satisfies the outside words moral urge to act immediately. However, this has added to the mayhem. It has increased the loss of lives, civilian lives, and pushed Syria away from a stable future. Hence, this claim would be developed on three main points. First and foremost, there is no clear group in the Syrian resistance for foreign countries to provide arms to, as these groups have different orientations and are supported by different countries. Hence, rises the following question. Who are the Free Syrian Army to help? Indeed, the Free Syrian Army, lacks legitimacy, as it is a disorganized mashup of disparate rebel groups and government soldiers who have switched sides. Such disparate groups are composed of guerrillas, and a guerrilla, according to Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, is a member of a small group of soldiers who are not part of the official army and who fight against official soldiers, usually to challenge the government. Hence, this group lacks legitimacy as it is not an official group. Second, the first frenzy of weapons pouring in Syria would trigger escalation in violence by Al-Assad regime. As Mac Lynch, a professor at George Washington University, puts it on the 24th of February 2012, and I quote, boosting rebel fighting capacity is likely to crystallize Syria's internal polarization and would do little to weaken Assad's regime. Hence, Syria's deepening slide into civil war would look likely. The most infamous instance here would be used from an example of Afghanistan, as the backlash was from the US arming rebels in Afghanistan since the 1980s. Hence, the country later turned into an Al-Qaeda sanctuary and was eventually invaded by US military forces. Hence, we are afraid this would likely to happen as well in Syria. Last but not least, we should rather go for peaceful means to solve the problem in Syria and avoid further conflict. Indeed, arming rebels will contribute to a worsening of the situation without means of reaching a peaceful end state. A year ago, in March 2012, Kofi Annan introduced a plan for peace for Syria that called for an immediate end to violence and human rights violation, securing a humanitarian access and facilitate a Syrian-led political transition to democratic, plural political parties, consensus through commencing a comprehensive political dialogue. However, this plan to cease fire was aborted by the Syrian rebels as they persisted on using violence. Hence, it's high time to stop arming those rebels and insist on peaceful ways to solve the situation. Obviously, in the light of the mentioned reasons, we should not arm the Syrian opposition, as foreign assistance to rebels would vindicate Bashar al-Assad's narrative that the rebels is a mere conspiracy of outside forces, including the US, Israel, and the Gulf countries. Thanks for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, honorable judges, opposition team, thank you for giving me the honor to talk with you. So this house believes that we should arm the opposition that is mainly and strictly for us, the Free Syrian Army. The Free Syrian Army is not a guerrilla. The Free Syrian Army is the ex-people from the army of Syria right now, who were against all the humanitarian crisis and all the human rights infringement that the Syrian regime has been doing. So giving them weapons is giving weapons to people who are structured, giving them to people who know the landscape, who know the country, and who know how to deal with such a crisis? Well,
Point of question, please.
yes.
Do you know that the Syrian, the SFA are multinational?
Okay.
They are multinational.
No, they're not multinational. The FSA is not a multinational group. The FSA is a group that is a dissident, mainly composed by dissidents from the army. Now, we are saying that we cannot arm them, and there are discussions that we cannot arm them because these people are not well known, they're not trained, they don't know how to deal with things. Well, there are discussions right now, and there are bids proposed by France and Britain in order to arm this group. So how can we say that? Also, talking about Afghanistan is completely different. Afghanistan is in a different geopolitical situation, especially in the 80s. The world has changed since the 80s. What we're trying to do right now is fostering a movement from the people in order to achieve democracy. Now, we can talk, no thank you, we can talk about peaceful negotiations, but next Monday, it would have been 2 years there have been unrest. This reminds me of a case of a woman who was talking about Tunisia. They said, we did the revolution so people in Tunis can do conferences about it, and we did not take any benefits. And this is what is happening when you tell me that we need to do peaceful negotiations. People need actions. People are dying. More than 60,000. The number is wrong. Sorry. More than 60,000 according to the United Nations. Are we going to stay? Are we going to give them a slow and a long death? Or are we going to back people and to create an equilibrium of forces? Yes?
But when you arm the SFA, won't you also incite for violence and cause the killing of a huge number of people?
How are we inciting for violence if we're trying to stop the violence that started from the Bashar regime? How are we going to stop violence when people are killed on a daily basis? If we're talking about conspiracy, how can you say that this regime that is supposed to stop Israel and people backing them has been attacked last month by Israel in itself and didn't do anything? This regime is not able to protect its people. It is killing it. It's not able to protect its land. It's being attacked, cannot do anything. So we need to foster the process. We need to make things happen really quick in order to go to a transitional period, in order to achieve democracy, in order to have a better solution for everyone. I'm sorry, I'll not take it. To summarize this whole thing, we have a situation, a humanitarian situation. We have a political situation. We have people being killed on a daily basis. And when I say on a daily basis, this is not even a metaphor. People are being killed right now. What can we do about it? Watch, talk about peaceful negotiations in fancy lounge rooms, or do something. Help them. Give them the right and the power to be able to push something that is murder, crime, and human rights infringement. Do we want to do that, or do we want to watch? It is our responsibility as the international community to give the people of Syria hope. Thank you.
The second speaker of the opposition team, Ms. Syrian. The floor is yours.
Okay, so hello, ladies and gentlemen, honorable judges, dear proposition team. So our house fervently believes that we should not arm the Syrian opposition. Now, the proposition team has said that we need to actually arm them in order to give them fair fights. When we speak about fair fights, don't we actually need to consider the civilians' lives? Are we actually concerned with to fight in terms of equality, to counter-attack in terms of violence, and to respond to violence by means of violence? You have kept spoken about how we need to arm the Syrian opposition as if it were the desperate measure here, and you have insisted and kept on insisting that this is an urgent moment, and the urgency of the now actually compels us to arm them and to support them with weapons. Well, I would like to tell you that if you actually arm them, you are actually warmongering. And I would like to explain this term for you. You are inciting for violence. You are provoking war and provoking violence. You cannot answer violence by violence. You cannot incite people to defend themselves in terms of violence, and your ultimate objective would be democracy. Democracy based on violence. Okay, that's very, very logical. Now, we move on to the second point. You have said, no thank you, you have said that the opposition, the Syrian opposition, are not multinational. Well, I would like to tell you that the opposition is composed of Tunisians, Algerians, Egyptians, even that is European Muslims. We hear about them now partaken in the opposition. Now, you should bear in mind that each and every one of them has a certain agenda and ideology. We have nationalists, we have communists, we have Muslims and Islamists. So, when you arm them, do you actually arm, that is, what group exactly? No, thank you. What group exactly? So, are you going to support the communist nation or the caliphate, or are you going to support the nationalist project? What exactly? So, you have said also that they're not guerrillas. We have given the definition of guerrillas, but I would like to repeat it if you have missed it. So the guerrilla are a group of people that work underground and that they oppose the military system of a certain country. So they are a guerrilla, they are a militia, a paramilitary brigade that use force to attack and to answer, that is to defend what they see as their rights. Now, if you... Yes, please?
Just a quick reminder, we're talking about the Free Syrian Army, we're not talking about Al-Qaeda.
Sorry, we're speaking about Syrian opposition. Now, we move on. No, thank you. So we said that they are, we spoke about, I was saying that they were, we said that they were Muslims and nationalists and communists, and then I moved to speak about how they actually use violence to incite violence. But the point here was that if you speak about guerrilla and militia, paramilitary brigade, as I was saying, then you are saying that, okay, we need to arm them. You need to arm, okay, but will you be able to control them? Because a guerrilla has, as a purpose, actually, no thank you, can do everything, because guerrillas refer to not conventional tactics of fighting back, but actually to what we call guerrilla warfare or guerrilla tactics. So, no thank you. For them, everything is allowed. They can recruit children, they can rape women, they can slaughter civilians. So are you really going to be able to stop them once you arm them? No thank you. Now we move on to a second point that you have said, and we would like to tell you that, okay, I have some questions, okay, rhetorical ones. Okay, you arm them, fine. They managed to topple Assad regime, that's great, but will you be able to retrieve arms from them later? Are you really going to retrieve them? I would like to tell you that Libya now, the position in Libya now, they were supported with arms, and now they refuse to surrender their arms. They refuse to surrender their arms, and we cannot await from a nation that is backed up with arms and weapons and such a powerful, such a violent power. You cannot wait for them to give back their arms. This actually would maybe lead to a whole military intervention in order to harness those militia. Now, another thing is that when we say that, for instance, those militias are actually have the right to fight for themselves, and they need to be given the force and the aptitudes actually to answer back the violence. Then you are, ladies and gentlemen, the proposition team is actually calling for violence by violence, and this is not something logical, and eventually this will not actually lead to any democratic or whatsoever thing. Thank you.
We move now to the floor debates. We have 10 minutes for the audience. Before we do that, I would like kindly to ask the audience and both teams to refrain from any expression of approval or excitement or disapproval during the speeches that are being made in order to respect the person who is delivering the speech. We start by questions for the address to the proposition team. Questions for the proposition.
We are seeing every day many persons dying in Syria, but the risk to armed opposition can be really dangerous because we are seeing a group of extremists participating in this conflict. So what do you think if we choose an international intervention and not arming the opposition?
Thank you very much. Another question for the proposition.
Thank you. You cited the opposition in Syria to the FSA. We saw on a conference the speaker, the representative of the FSA, saying they are coordinating what you consider, or rather, you say, consider as terrorists, Jabhat al-Nusra, in fact. How can you guarantee for those arms you will give to the FSA not to go to terrorists?
Thank you. Another question for the proposition. The back.
For the proposition team, you told us that you didn't even pick an eye on the profiles of those who were going freedom fighters in Syria. I mean, these people, do you really think that these people have ethics? These people are throwing people over the roof of buildings. I mean, do you think that they're really fighting for democracy?
Thank you. Questions now for the opposition team. Opposition? Yes, please.
In fact, it's not a question. I just want to remind the opposition team that the French and American revolutions were also supported by arms, and they gained their fights. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question for the opposition. Yes, please.
You defined the Syrian opposition and divided them into three groups, and you said that they are not legitimate groups. In a state of chaos, which is what's happening right now in Syria, who will legitimize whom?
Another question for the opposition. Opposition, please.
Thank you. You said that we need to resort to peaceful means to solve this conflict. Don't you think that we already tried a lot of means, reconciliation, mediation, good offices, etc., but nothing has worked so far? So can you please give us an alternative that can actually be applied? Thank you.
Thank you. We move back to the proposition side. Questions for the proposition?
You talked about reversing powers. I would like to know, would you go as far as giving chemical and biological arms and weapons to the FSA when Bashar al-Assad has these arms and warned that he can use them?
Thank you. Other question for the proposition on this side?
Would you think that the provision of arms would be a license for Russia and Iran, who are supporters for Assad's regime, to supply arms with no constraint once the opposition backers are openly doing so? I mean, wouldn't that push the gap up to a higher level of militarized conflict?
Thank you. Another question for the proposition.
Okay, so what makes you sure that if we arm them, they will win? and using violence is the best solution to stop the other violence. Thank you.
Thank you. We move back to questions for the opposition. Please.
So, regarding the chaos that's happening in Syria right now, don't you think this extreme situation claims extreme measures?
Thank you. Another question for the opposition. Yes, far left. Opposition. Yes, please.
Thanks. Well, you have in Syria, you have Bashar Assad regime is taking weapons from Russia. You have the whole aircraft carrier Kuznetsov in port of Tartus. So, if Bashar Assad is taking weapons, so why do you oppose arming the Syrian army? Thank you, the Free Syrian Army.
Thank you. Another question for the opposition. Questions for the opposition team. No questions for the opposition?
Can I have a question for both?
Yes, please.
I have a... This is the classic.
Okay.
Hello? Hello? No, it doesn't matter. Thanks. Hi. I have a question for both of the debaters, and thank you very much. Very, very interesting arguments you've posed. I'd like to see a little bit more, I've heard quite a lot of advocacy. What I'd really like to hear is from both teams, if possible, from my side, how you see your positions actually rolling out to a solution to the problem. And I think that challenge applies to both of the teams, both the for and the against the motion.
Thank you. Questions now, we move back to the proposition side. Proposition, yes.
Hello, for the proposition team. If up to 70,000 people died in Syria, up to 4 million are in need of humanitarian assistance according to the UN, don't you think that the priority would be to give these people food and medicines instead of giving them weapons to help provoke more blood? Thank you.
Thank you. Another question for the proposition. Yes.
I would like to ask the proposition team. In fact, I would like to go back to the definition of the opposition, that you restricted to the Free Syrian Army. Actually, where do politicians and opposition parties stand in this definition? Also, you said that you will arm the Syrian opposition institutionally. Do you think that the opposition is structured enough to be institutionally armed? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We move back to the opposition side. Questions for the opposition in the back?
Thank you very much. I want to thank both sides about the arguments they're giving, but I am really worrying about the game of being violent and being more violent, having arms and asking for more arms, and asking nations to give arms to the opposite. I mean, this would never end. My idea is, why not think of asking the international community to stop the fire, to stop the war for a moment, to have time for reflection, and to think of solution, to think of finding a way to get out of it, instead of asking for more and more arming. This is a non-stop violent story. So my idea is, why not get together both opposites? Here you are in a war, you are in a few minutes you get in fire. So why not stop and think of solutions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please keep your questions as concise as possible so many people participate. Thank you. Another question for the opposition. 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 Yes.
Thank you. You were talking about peaceful negotiation and peaceful conferences and everything, but I really didn't get your arguments about how not arming the opposition, the Syrian opposition, would really help those Syrian opposition to solve their problems and to get rid of the dictatorship Bashar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question for the opposition. Please, here.
Next Monday, the Syrian crisis would have been going for 2 years. Apparently, the peaceful means are not working. So, how much longer can we wait before considering another option?
Thank you. Question for the proposition side. Now, yes.
You actually didn't consider that the resistance is mainly composed of foreign members, about 40% actually. Are you implying that we should arm foreigners to participate and to have the upper hand in a war which is not their own to begin with, to decide the fate of a country that they do not belong to in the first place?
Thank you very much. One last question for the opposition side in order to get balance. Yes, please. For the opposition.
Who is able to negotiate today with Bashar al-Assad if we are saying that he is killing all the opposite and the majority of the opposition is outside country?
Thank you very much. Thank you for all your questions. Now it's time for the closing remarks of the opposition team. Ms. Safia Shaban, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, today, my teammates, Bushra, Syrian, and I, the opposition team, were against the motion which says this House would arm the Syrian opposition. And this is due to several reasons. Mainly, the ambiguity and the foggy image of those people, that is, the opposition. Also, the other thing is empowering those people with weapons, there is the opposition, would only promote the escalation of violence in Bashar's regime. We also try to focus on measures which are peaceful and civilized in order to settle down the conflict in a very peaceful manner. So by way of answering your questions, I would start by, we refer to the term legitimate because we deem the opposition as unofficial individuals. And for the alternative measures that we would deem as important, we would enforce a strict embargo. That is, we need to face those two parties to come to the table and negotiate, debate like civilized people. We could not respond to violence by violence. We could not shed blood all over Syria just for the sake of protecting the Syrian people. This is not protection, and this is not a way to overthrow Bashar al-Assad regime. Also, people said that that Russia and China are the one who armed Bashar al-Assad. And here, if we could claim that Russia and China should also arm the opposition, we would fall into race arms. And here I would like to define what is race arms. It is two or more countries are giving arms to other countries. And that's all. Thank you.
To end this debate, Mr. Hashim Belghazi will deliver a 3-minute speech and closing remarks for the opposition team.
Good evening, everybody. I'll try to answer as much question as possible, but before that, I'd like to start with this. First, when someone has a cancer, you don't negotiate with it. You use your most and severe weapon against it to fight it. That weapon is chemo. So you don't negotiate with evil, you fight it. Syria has its own cancer, which is Bashar's regime. And the chemo of Syria is weapons and bullets, which we will provide to the Syrian Free Army. Starting answering the question, I'll start with those of the opposition team. I'll answer the first question of the opposition team, saying that Riyad al-Assad, one of the leaders of the FSA, stated in October 2011 that the Free Syrian Army has no political goals except the removal of Bashar Assad as a president. So they're not actually terrorists, they just want him out, and you seem to want him still in. We won't arm the terrorists, we will arm the institution that we believe in order to foster the revolutionary process for a future democratic transition. Why to arm them? Because there is a humanitarian crisis, as you stated, more than 70,000 referring to the UN statistics. 2 years of unrests, this Monday it will be 2 years of unrests, to make the balance between forces. There are people armed by Russian and Chinese, and they are rebels fighting with their own hands. And to avoid a foreign intervention, actually, to answer your question, sir. The Syrian Free Army used it to Bashar criminal regime, and know that peace is no more an option. When peace is no more an option, they have to fight for it. Now I'll proceed with the audience question. You said we want why not a foreign intervention? Well, we think it's a Syrian conflict, and it has to stay within the Syrian borders. So that's why we don't claim a foreign intervention. We won't give mass, the lady there asked me another question. Well, we won't give a mass destructive weapon to the opposition. This is out of the subject. And that would be everything, I guess.
Thank you very much, all teams, for your efforts and for this wonderful debate. Thank you, audience, for your questions and remarks. I hope you enjoyed this debate as much as I did. Now I give the floor to Mr. Hamza, who will explain to you what will happen this evening.
Okay, now the judges will leave the room, and I'm going to go back to you. So we have 1 hour left for the announcement, and we'll see who's going to be the best debate club and who's going to be the best debater. So you have to do the checkout and go to lunch. Then we'll meet here, please, at 2:25. Okay, at 2:25, make announcements, the scores of the all meetings. Thank you very much, Zoe.
Hamza, for audience. Yeah.